Introduction. There are no bills for introduction. The House then comes to questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, what reports has he received on the economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, emerging evidence suggests that despite the February earthquake, the economy has been on track and perhaps a little stronger than expected in the first part of 2011. Manufacturing volumes rose by 1.9% in the March quarter, following a 3.7% increase in December. Retail sale volumes rose 0.9% in March. Wholesale trade was up 2.8%, and consumer confidence has lifted. This resilience in the face of adversity highlights the many positives supporting the economy. These include high export prices, strong demand growth from Asia, lowest interest rates in 45 years, and a credible path back to surplus for the government's accounts.
Amy Adams.
To the Minister, what do the latest NZIER consensus forecasts show?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the consensus forecasts are a blend of forecasts from 11 different forecasting organisations. They show GDP growth over the next year to be about 2%, followed by 4% in the year following that. A large lift in residential investment, growing by 38% in the June 2013 year, reflecting the Christchurch rebuild. Interest rates staying low and the government's budget balance improving.
Amy Adams.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. How do these projections compare with those in Budget 2011?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they are fairly similar. The private sector forecasts covered by the NZIER consensus are quite close to those prepared by Treasury. For instance, they forecast employment rising by 3.8%. Treasury picks about 3.6%. Their average consumer price index forecasts for inflation are identical to Treasury's.
The Honourable John Biscowen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Finance. Has the gap between GDP per capita in Australia and GDP per capita in New Zealand narrowed or widened since his government came to office, or does he not know?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't give the member the precise figures, but in the first quarter of this year, it's probably narrowed because our economy looks like it's grown a bit and the Australian economy has shrunk. However, a quarter-to-quarter measure is almost irrelevant. In the long term, we believe that sound policies and careful and considered decision-making will mean that over time we will close the gap with Australia, and the resilience that this economy has shown in recent times is a positive indicator of that.
Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable John.
Mr. Speaker, the member stated by saying that he couldn't give me a precise answer. I wasn't asking for a precise answer. I was simply asking whether the gap has narrowed or widened. Or alternatively, if the Minister did not know that, he could simply say...
Order. The Minister, I heard distinctly say that he believed while he couldn't give the precise figures, he believed during, I think, the first quarter of this year, the gap had probably narrowed. So he gave an answer to... Well,
he answered that in connection with... He answered that in connection with the first quarter. I specifically said since his government came to office. I was asking, has the gap narrowed or widened since his government first came to office?
And he said he doesn't have those precise figures. I think with the primary question, what reports has he received on the economy, the member cannot expect the Minister to have that kind of specific, detailed information. Supplementary question, Honourable David Cunliffe.
Speaker, to the Minister of Finance, does he recall replying to a similar question to this primary in September 2009, quote, I have received reports indicating that the economy is showing some early signs of recovery, close quote, or the one in October 2009 to which he replied, in recent weeks a number of reports have confirmed an early sign of pickup in business confidence, or the one in March 2010 where he replied, it's important we convert the early start in recovery into a permanent lift, or the one in July 2010, during which when what turned out to be a year of zero growth, when he said, quote, the economy is making very significant progress and we're working hard to get the economy on its feet. Or is it his habit? Or is his habit
Order. Order, I want to hear the question. It's a bit long, but Order. Order, I apologise to the member. The question is a little longer than usual, but there is a pattern to it, and I do want to hear the question. The Honourable David Cunliffe. And I want his own colleagues to let him be heard. The Honourable David Cunliffe. We won't start again.
I've anticipated my point of order, sir. Mr. Speaker, not wanting to miss the punchline, is his habit of counting his chickens before they've hatched one of the reasons why Standard & Poor's have kept his government's credit rating on negative outlook?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I do recall those answers, and I'm impressed with what an upbeat and aspirational government we have been through some very tough times.
Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. What factors would put the forecast return to growth at risk?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are always risks to the future prospects of this economy. For instance, this week there are critical meetings in Europe where they're trying to grapple with the problem of potential default of Greece. And if that was to occur, then the markets in which we borrow significantly and regularly could be disrupted. There are also risks closer to home. We could undermine recovery if, for instance, half-baked spending promises led to soaring debt. That would be bad for the economy.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, given his aspirational reply to my earlier supplementary, is it now he who is dancing from cloud to cloud, or has he seen the new immigration report from Statistics New Zealand, which shows chippies, plumbers and other building industry professionals are leaving the country at a rate of 20 a day, and over 4,000 have left since the first Christchurch earthquake? And how will Christchurch rebuilding happen if his government makes no effort to retain the skilled workforce we need to undertake it?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have seen those figures. In the first place, it is a responsibility of the companies who expect to be rebuilding Christchurch to ensure that they have skills. Of course, it's going to be tight because they're competing with very, very large salaries, particularly in Western Australia, where there is something like 250 billion of capital projects in the pipeline. However, we're confident that we have the resources, both the funding and the skills, to rebuild Christchurch.
The Honourable John Boscawen.
Supplementary to the Minister of Finance. Has the gap between GDP per capita in Australia and GDP per capita in New Zealand narrowed or widened since his government came to office, or does he not know?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't give the member those precise figures, but the government has, as the member knows, the government wants to close the gap with Australia by 2025, and in any given year or two, it might move one way or the other. As, for instance, in the last quarter, it's probably moved in favour of New Zealand. Our policies are focused on longer-term increase in New Zealand's growth potential, and we are putting in place policies such as investment in infrastructure, major tax change, and a very efficient public sector that are going to enable us to achieve that.
The Honourable John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Finance. Has the government instigated any investigation into how South Canterbury Finance was underwritten by the taxpayer to the tune of $1.7 billion now that its president for life has been charged with over 50 counts of fraud, including theft?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't comment at all on the matters regarding South Canterbury that are now before the court, but the existence of the guarantee of not of South Canterbury Finance but of its depositors, which is a different thing, came into existence in the financial crisis in late 2008, and as I recall it, the whole of the Parliament supported that guarantee being put in place to prevent financial contagion, which could potentially have brought down much larger financial institutions such as our banks. And on reflection, New Zealand is in a much stronger position than many developed countries because we did not have a banking collapse.
Question number 2, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker,